If you've reached Paragon 800 already, you might have taken a look at the new Paragon tree, Apothecary. So we'll go ahead and note that this can be seen on the Wowhead calculator, as well as the 2 new additional trees which you can't see in the game yet. So we're going to take a look at those first, and I have gone through and set up the Paragon board in the way that I use my points. Keep in mind that you can now reset your Paragon points whenever you want, as well as save them in different configurations to your armory. So this is not as popular as it used to be, but there are still many players who are interested in having just kind of a default setup that they can use for everything and just switch trees from build to build rather than reconfiguring anything. And I'm going to do that part second, just because, like I said, it's kind of reduced a little bit in the demand. But let's go ahead and take a look at the 3 new trees that we're getting, or perhaps we already have one. So Apothecary here, and this is all about healing. It's got health globes, it's got rejuvenation, it's even got cooldowns for potion recharge, and essentially right now there's kind of a limited number of uses that I can think of. Now you might have some more niche cases and so forth, but I think this is probably going to be strong in something like Endless Defense. This is probably going to be strong in raids, especially if you're at a point in the raids where you have dedicated rezzers, as is kind of the common term for players who might not quite be at the combat rating, but have enough to survive for a little bit of time, and they can kind of get a res off and go from player to player, heal up, and keep the party or the raid alive in such a manner to clear it. So this will have some benefit there. The first talent here increases the healing you receive from health globes by 10% for each party member. Now, this is pretty substantial, especially considering you can stack this, right? That's a large increase to the health globes. The second talent, regeneration, and I know the top part of this is cut off, but it says whenever you drop below 30% life, you will regenerate 7.5% of your maximum life per second for every nearby party member for 6 seconds. Now that's substantial, right? Even if you just have 1 stack of this at the 7.5%, you're still going to get 45% of your maximum life over those 6 seconds. Now, if you have 2 players, you're going to get 90% of your maximum life. So you're going to actually get more than 100%, which means that this could be very effective in a situation where there's unavoidable damage, okay? So just keep that in mind, especially as we see these new raids. And I will be doing the new raids either tonight or tomorrow and putting up a video with as many of the mechanics for those as I can. So stay tuned for those if you're interested. And next talent here, you and each party member within 12 yards have your healing potions recharged to maximum whenever your party member damages an uninjured boss. So the first thing that comes to mind here is the gauntlet, right? This is just going to give you basically full health potions every time you get to the next stage of the gauntlet. Increases the recharge rate of your healing potions for each party member within you, and this is substantial as well. Another 7.5% per member. So 30% if you have 4 players. And that's a noticeable increase in my opinion. Resilient, the bonuses of regeneration and battlefield efficiency are now increased from 7.5% to 10%. And again, we're talking about how big the 7.5% was and increasing this to 10. So overall, the uses that you may have for this tree might not be enormous, but the tree is actually very powerful in my opinion when you do have a use, if that makes sense. So the situations in which you might swap this on, this is going to be a very, very strong tree if it's something that you're going to benefit from for the content that you're doing. Now, Weaver sounds exactly like it, is named, and honestly, a lot of these trees, if not all of them, are very appropriately named in my opinion. So Weaver, you're going to be weaving, okay? And what you're weaving is primary attacks and skills, and you're going to get different bonuses that stack for that. So dynamism, and this is kind of what this tree is all about. You gain a stack of unseen dynamism as you hit enemies with either a primary attack or skill, and the attacks must alternate between primary attack or skill to build stacks. It's going to increase your damage by 1% for every stack up to a maximum of 10. And we've seen other things that are similar to this, and this is just kind of the newest version. And this is yet another case where we see primary attacks kind of being emphasized, and we've seen a lot of this in this update, whether it's old essences getting updates, new essences involving primary attack, right? We've seen Gloomcast recently as a gem involving primary attack. So we're seeing a lot of this focus towards primary attack. So I have the general idea that they're trying to increase the use of primary attacks just kind of across the game in general. Now I want to make note of the last talent as well here. Gifted, you can now stack it up to 15 times. So you can actually get this buff up to a 15% and just a pretty solid damage increase overall. And on top of this, you're going to get 3 stacks of that dynamism within 3 seconds excuse me, if you gain 3 stacks within 3 seconds, your next 3 primary attacks unleash chain lightning. Now, there does not seem to be any cooldown or duration of this buff, so that you still want to continue to weave. Okay, so if you get 3 of these stacks, meaning that you get 3 primary attacks in conjunction with the 3 skills, that would actually be 6, right? Because you gain 1 stack each time. So you can go primary, skill, primary. And I just want to clarify that because some people may say, well, how am I going to get 3 separate attacks off it, or 3 primaries if I'm weaving and so forth? So it's just 3 total. So meaning you can have 2 skills, 1 primary in the middle, 2 primaries, 1 skill in the middle. So this should be very easy to do within 3 seconds. And you're just going to get an additional buff. And then your next 3 primary attacks, which are still going to be weaved, right? So it's going to be every other from that point, but there's no buff duration. So it's just going to last forever. Cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds. So essentially once you get it, you'll expel it, and then you'll have to wait those 30 seconds and get it back. Impulsive, it no longer loses all stacks when it expires, but instead will lose 1 stack every 3 seconds. So if you mess up the rotation or fail to keep kind of charging it, you'll then kind of have a slow decrease, and this just is obviously a no-brainer to take if you're in this tree. In fact, everything here, similar to, say, the duelist tree, you would just take everything if you plan on using this tree. And we covered that. So when you have 10 or more stacks of the Unseen Dynamism, you'll gain Uncanny, which increases your critical hit chance by 10%. Now, this does not increase with this final node. In a lot of trees, that does. So this is the talent that will get buffed, but increasing these stacks will not increase this critical hit chance to 15%. Just something to keep in mind, but still 10% crit, good nonetheless. For Executioner, and this is actually a PvP tree. So this is all focused around essentially chasing down and finishing or executing enemies. And again, of interesting note for Crusaders in this update, the new skill that they got is actually kind of an execute, right? It does more damage depending on the health that the enemy is missing. So we're seeing some abilities that actually are going to help finish targets off. And this, as a Paragon tree, will be usable by anybody. But I just wanted to make mention that we are seeing kind of some themes or direction that they seem to want to be buffing or making more prevalent in the game as we kind of go forward here. This is going to increase your movement speed by 30% for 6 seconds. That is substantial. When an enemy player falls below 30% within 12 yards, dealing damage to an enemy player below 30% life will disable them and slow them for 45% for 8 seconds. That is an enormous slow. It is one of the best slows in the game that I can even think of off the top of my head, right? Not only is it a very high amount, but it is an incredibly long duration. Bravery, the duration of chase down, and the duration of debilitate are increased to 9 and 6 seconds respectively. Insanity, when you defeat an enemy player, the cooldowns of chase down, debilitate, and finishing touch are reduced by 8 seconds. So the more you're killing, the better this is. Finishing touch, your damage is increased by 200% whenever you deal damage to an enemy player below 20%. Cannot occur more often than once every 30 seconds. However, the cooldown is reduced by 8 seconds if you take this talent. And I imagine if you're going into this tree, again, you will have all of the active nodes and when you have this tree activated for use in PvP. Now, I think this tree is very strong. In fact, at first glance, I actually think it's better than the Gladiator tree. So I think that once this is unlocked, that you'll see the large majority of players swap to this. There may be some cases which you don't, and that will be classes that don't get a ton of benefit from all of the effects. Say they don't quite need the damage, or they don't need the additional movement speed because they're mobile in general. For example, a monk may not need the additional movement speed to chase somebody down and kill them. But in general, I think you'll see a large portion of players swap to this tree, and essentially the Gladiator tree might be outdated. So now that we've covered what the tree that's out and the trees to come, I have gone through and set up all my points, and you can see at the bottom here that you can do this setup at Paragon 644. And I'm going to emphasize again that you can always reset your Paragon points at this point in the game, and you can even change how your Paragon points are configured and save it to your armory accordingly. But if you want a default build to kind of work off of and just cycle your tree, as opposed to, rearranging it for every single loadout, perhaps you're more casual, or perhaps you're lazy, perhaps you just want to make things easy, this is still my preferred and recommended route. At this point, there's so much life and damage in these Paragon trees that I recommend taking it all. This didn't always be the case because we used to think that it was more benefit for free to play to focus on secondary sets, but at this point you're just missing so much damage in life which is just an enormous help for you regardless of your resonance level or anything like that. And I recommend going through and taking them all. One thing I want to note in this tree, and I've got this set up, and I'll leave this link in the description so we don't have to go through each individual point. We'll just kind of go through the trees in general. But first note is in the Vanquisher, I actually recommend getting to this 5 of 5 deeper pockets. Everybody's farming, right? We're all doing something at this point, whether we're working on getting to Paragon 800, whether we've hit 800 and working through Inferno. It just makes sense to have this increased inventory room. We're all looking for blacksmith upgrades, right? Because the new weapon slots also have blacksmith levels. So really not much reason to not take this. Potency is always kind of welcomed. In terms of point investment for 16 points, that extra inventory room for any of the farming you're doing is just really valuable. Do you have to take it? No, of course not. This is optional, and if you don't want potency, you don't have to take that. And if you don't use Vanquisher, you don't have to take the exorcism either. But I do recommend taking these 16 points because you do have a fair amount to spare, and that's still going to leave you with 140 points to spare. For Survivor, I know some people use this. Personally, I don't see a use for this now. In fact, if a big use for this was Endless Defense, and I would actually recommend trying the Apothecary. So I don't see a use for this now, so that means we're just going through the tree, taking the life and down to the damage. Treasure Hunter, I still like this setup, and this gets you the life, the damage, as well as lucky. And if you're a class that benefits a lot from getting globes when you're farming, this is huge, right? So Crusader is the biggest one that I always stress. Crusader gets a tremendous increase to farm speed just from using this talent, more so than any other tree in my opinion. So I like to run this when I'm farming as a Crusader. Everything else does not work as described, unfortunately, so you don't get full benefit or as much as you would think. Whether you want to go through and take the whole tree, that's up to you and a different story. But in general, just know if you're not aware that all of this does not work exactly as it's kind of written on the tooltips there. Gladiator. Now, I would recommend spending points here until the Executioner is unlocked. So we, of course, go through, take the life and the damage. And if you're doing any kind of PvP at this point, I would actually recommend taking all 100 points in this tree to get these additional active nodes. Like I said, you can turn this tree on, and there's just so many excessive points at this point. If you actively PvP, it makes sense, in my opinion, to have all this extra stuff. So this is the first place for most players that do all content that I would recommend to actually spend some points. In Soldier, again, very limited use. There are some uses in PvP. I think this is far less popular than Gladiator, and if you are somebody that utilizes this, then I think that you'd have a better understanding of where you want to spend your points. But in general, you're taking the life, you go through the resistance to take the damage, and then you're kind of done with that tree. For Mastermind, now this is an easy one in my opinion. For only 2 points, you can get the rest of what's here for active skills, so I definitely recommend that, and then you can just kind of move on for that. But Massacre, very good if you're doing group content, whether it be raids, good to have somebody running in dungeons, and so forth. For Massacre, now I go through, take the life and the damage again. Massacre is one of my preferred farming trees, so in general, I typically have this max. There are some classes that are exceptions to that, but I do like to have this max, so just for demonstration purpose, I'm going to show you that you can max this, and you will still have a bunch of extra points, right? We still have 89 points available, and we're basically almost through all of the trees at this point, right? Just a few more. So you can see there's plenty of points to kind of spend, get a ton of utility. We get into Brawler, take the damage. You can skip this node. It's only 1 point, but it is possible to skip it because you can start up here. And if for some reason you didn't want the damage for whatever reason, or you were lower level, you could just start with the life. Duelist, and this is another tree that I like to finish off. For the most part, I don't actually take the armor, but I like to take all of the actives, which will then include the armor pen. And you'll see, again, it's really minimal cost, right? The armor pen is 10, and after that, to get the rest of the active is just 4 points. So for 14 points, you can basically finish this tree, and it just makes sense to do. And now in this tree, unless you're going to be actively using it, then you can kind of stay away from it. But if you do have a plan for this, you've got 75 points, and you can fill out everything you need to get these active nodes. And I think that this tree is worth trying, especially in certain content. You know, try it in raids, especially if you're kind of on the cusp of that combat rating, that's required. So a lot of value could be seen in here. But in general, you still got 75 points. So if you've got everything covered with the build as I have it at this point, you can start to prioritize whatever your favorite stat is. So in this example, we'll just go ahead, and I want to copy this. Excuse me one sec. I want to copy that before I spend the additional points here just for reference for everybody. So If you want to focus on armor pen, you can start looking where you can get it for relatively cheap. 1 point in Wrath to get 25 armor pen is a decent option. If you're looking for potency, I should know this, right? Brawler. So you can get 20 points access right here for potency. You can also get some potency here that you can unlock for 1 point. So just decide what your preferred main stat is. In general, armor pen is fairly good for lower resonance players, increases their ability to deal critical strike damage, and potency is good for high resonance players who might be able to get enough potency to kind of cause effects to linger and so forth. So to figure out what you want to stack for a main stat and just go after kind of the smart choices for that, and that'll really round out your points all the way up to 800. It is possible to actually cap all of the nodes. I believe you can actually do this with potency, so you can actually get every potency node and still have leftover points, so you can then just pick another main stat and so forth, or secondary stat. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.